I was born loving Formula One, and I pursued my impossible dream. This was truly the probably the ultimate uh, satisfaction. In my career as a race driver. At 86, I've had plenty of time to look back on the people who shaped my life in racing, and after all these years, people still ask me the same question. Mario, who was the greatest Formula One driver you ever saw? It's it's a question I've answered more times than I can count. But if you ask me who I admired most, that's a very different conversation. Greatness belongs to history books. Admiration belongs to your heart. You admire someone because they showed you something you didn't know was possible, because they changed the way you thought about driving a racing car, because every time they climbed into the cockpit, you knew you were about to witness something special. I was lucky enough to compete alongside some extraordinary drivers and to watch others carry Formula One into new generations. Every era produced champions. Every era produced heroes. But only a handful of drivers left me with lessons that stayed long after the checkered flag had fallen. The five men I'm about to talk about couldn't have been more different from one another. One possessed the most natural talent I've ever witnessed. One changed the future of Formula One without winning every argument at the time. One relied on his mind as much as his courage. One drove with a passion that reminded everyone why racing captured our imaginations. And one inspired millions by proving that a driver could become bigger than the sport itself. Those are the five Formula One drivers I admired most. And after all these years, I still find myself thinking about every one of them. The first name that comes to mind is Jim Clark. That probably won't surprise anyone who followed Formula One in the 1960s. But admiration isn't about agreeing with popular opinion. It's about recognizing something so rare that even decades later you still struggle to explain it. That's exactly how I've always felt about Jim. When I first began spending more time around the European racing scene, Jim already had a reputation that seemed almost mythical. Drivers talked about him with enormous respect, but what struck me was how calmly they did it. Nobody described him as aggressive or intimidating. They talked about his smoothness, his precision, and how effortlessly he seemed to make impossible things look ordinary. In a sport filled with larger-than-life personalities, Jim almost seemed too quiet to become a legend. Then he put on a helmet, and everything changed. What I admired wasn't simply that he won races. Plenty of drivers have done that. It was the way he won them. Jim never looked like he was wrestling the car. Even on circuits that demanded absolute commitment, the Lotus seemed to glide beneath him. You could watch him through a fast corner and almost convince yourself he wasn't pushing very hard. Then the timing screens would appear, and somehow he had found another half second that nobody else could explain. That's a gift very few racing drivers have ever possessed. Some drivers attack the circuit, others overpower the car through sheer determination. Jim did something different. He understood the rhythm of a race better than anyone I'd ever seen. Every steering input, every braking point, every correction looked so natural that spectators often underestimated just how extraordinary he really was. The season that always comes back to me is 1965. Jim Clark won 6 of the 10 championship races that year and secured his second world championship, but Formula One was only part of what made that season unforgettable. He also traveled back to America and won the Indianapolis 500, becoming the first driver in nearly half a century to win it with a rear-engined car. I know exactly what that victory meant because Indianapolis became such an important part of my own life. Jim didn't just win one of the world's greatest races. He changed it forever. After that afternoon, the future of American open-wheel racing looked completely different. I remember thinking how incredibly adaptable he was. Europe, America, different cars, different circuits, different styles of racing. None of it seemed to matter. He found speed everywhere because his greatest strength wasn't tied to one machine. It came from his understanding of what a racing car needed from its driver. That's an ability no engineer can build into a chassis. His career ended far too soon at Hockenheim in 1968, and I still wonder what Formula One might have looked like if we'd been allowed to watch him race for another decade. Some drivers leave behind statistics. Jim Clark left behind possibilities. People still ask what records he could have broken, how many championships he might have won, and whether anyone would have been able to stop him. None of us will ever know. What I do know is this: whenever conversations turn to natural talent, I never have to think very long before answering. Jim Clark showed me that true greatness doesn't always announce itself with noise or drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, does its job better than anyone else in the world, and leaves the rest of us chasing a standard we may never reach. I admired many drivers throughout my life, but Jim was the first one who made me realize that perfection behind the wheel could actually exist. The next driver is Jackie Stewart. If Jim Clark taught me what natural talent looked like, Jackie showed me what professionalism could become. He proved that success in Formula One wasn't built on instinct alone. It came from preparation, discipline, and having the courage to challenge traditions that everyone else simply accepted. Jackie and I raced against each other during one of the most dangerous periods this sport has ever known. Back then, climbing into a Formula One car meant accepting risks that today would be unimaginable. Drivers were lost with heartbreaking regularity, circuits had little protection, and safety often seemed like an afterthought. Most of us believed that was simply the price of being a racing driver. Jackie refused to accept that. Some people misunderstood him in those years. They thought his campaigns for safer circuits and better medical facilities meant he wasn't willing to take risks. That couldn't have been further from the truth. You don't win 3 world championships by being afraid. Jackie raced as hard as anyone I've ever known. And the difference was that he believed dying shouldn't be considered part of the job description. I admired how methodical he was every race weekend. Jackie never left things to chance. Before many drivers had even thought about fine-tuning every detail, he was studying circuits, analyzing braking points, working closely with engineers, and making sure every aspect of the car suited his style. He approached Formula One almost like a scientist conducting an experiment. Everything had a purpose. Every adjustment had a reason. That attention to detail became obvious during his championship campaigns, particularly in 1969 and again in 1971. While other drivers relied on raw speed to overcome problems, Jackie often seemed one step ahead before the race had even begun. He understood that winning on Sunday usually started with the work nobody saw on Thursday and Friday. That philosophy changed the way many drivers approached the sport, including me. I also respected the composure he carried inside the cockpit. Formula One can tempt drivers into making emotional decisions. A late braking move, a desperate overtake, or trying to recover lost time too quickly can end a race in seconds. Jackie rarely allowed frustration to dictate his driving. He always appeared to have a bigger picture in mind. Sometimes patience won him races that aggression would have lost. Away from the circuit, his influence became even greater. After losing so many friends, including Jim Clark, Piers Courage, Jochen Rindt, Francois Severt, and others, Jackie never stopped pushing Formula One toward a safer future. Many people resisted those changes because they believed danger was part of the sport's identity. Looking back now, it's remarkable how much of modern Formula One exists because Jackie refused to stay silent. As someone who raced through that same era, I understand how difficult that position must have been, and it's never easy to stand against tradition, especially when many of your own competitors disagree with you. Jackie accepted criticism because he believed the next generation deserved better than the one before it. History proved he was right. When I think about Jackie Stewart today, I don't just remember the championships or the victories. I remember a man who understood that a racing driver's responsibility extended beyond the finish line. He showed all of us that being a champion isn't only about beating the field. Sometimes it's about leaving the sport stronger than the way you found it. That's one of the greatest achievements any driver can ever claim, and it's why my admiration for Jackie has only grown with time. Then there was Niki Lauda. If Jackie Stewart represented preparation, Niki represented understanding. I've often said that some drivers rely on instinct while others rely on courage. Niki had both, but what separated him from almost everyone else was his ability to think faster than the race itself. The first thing people noticed about Niki wasn't his personality. It certainly wasn't charisma. He wasn't trying to entertain anyone. He didn't care whether he looked glamorous in front of the cameras, and he rarely said more than he felt needed to be said. Everything about him suggested efficiency. Even his conversations sounded like technical briefings. At first, some people mistook that for being cold. I never did. I saw someone who treated Formula One like a profession before it truly became one. When Ferrari hired him in 1974, many questioned the decision. He wasn't the obvious superstar, and there were critics who believed he had bought his way into opportunities earlier in his career. Niki answered every one of those doubts the only way that mattered. He transformed Ferrari from a team searching for direction into world champions. By 1975, he had won his first Formula One World Championship, and it wasn't simply because he drove quickly. He understood how to develop a racing car better than almost anyone. That may sound less exciting than talking about daring overtakes or impossible qualifying laps, but it's one of the most valuable skills a driver can possess. Niki could explain exactly what the car was doing, why it was doing it, and what needed to change. Engineers trusted his feedback because it was precise, consistent, and honest. He wasn't chasing miracles. He was building performance piece by piece. Then came Nürburgring in 1976, a race none of us who lived through it will ever forget. The accident itself has been remembered for decades, but what continues to amaze me isn't the crash, it's what happened afterward. Niki suffered burns so severe that many believed his racing career and even his life were over. A priest was called because people didn't expect him to survive. Yet just 6 weeks later, he climbed back into a Ferrari at Monza his wounds still visible, his face still healing, and finished fourth against the best drivers in the world. I've never forgotten that image. People love using the word courage in motorsport, but that was courage in its purest form. Not because he ignored fear, but because he understood it completely and refused to let it decide his future. Most of us cannot imagine returning to the place that almost took our lives. Nicky didn't just return to Formula One. He fought for another world championship that same season against James Hunt, one of the greatest title battles the sport has ever witnessed. Even after retiring, Nicky continued influencing Formula One in different ways, whether through team management, television analysis, or helping shape Mercedes into a modern powerhouse decades later. His impact stretched far beyond the years he spent behind the wheel. What I admired most was his honesty. Nicky never pretended to be something he wasn't. If the car wasn't good enough, he'd say so. If he made a mistake, he'd admit it. If he disagreed with someone, you knew exactly where you stood. There was something refreshing about that in a sport often filled with politics and carefully chosen words. Whenever I think about Niki Lauda, I don't first remember the championships, remarkable as they were. I remember a man who proved that intelligence could win races, resilience could inspire generations, and honesty could become one of a champion's greatest strengths. He reminded all of us that the strongest driver isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes he's simply the one who understands himself better than anyone else. Now, this is where the conversation becomes a little more emotional for me. Gilles Villeneuve wasn't a driver I admired because he accumulated championships. In fact, he won only 6 Formula One races. If you judged him by statistics alone, you would never understand why his name still carries so much weight. To understand Gilles, you had to watch him race. Numbers simply couldn't capture what he meant to Formula One. The first time I watched Gilles drive, it felt as though he had a completely different relationship with a racing car than everyone else. Most of us search for the fastest way around a circuit while still respecting the limits of the machine. Gilles seemed to treat those limits as suggestions rather than rules. He attacked every corner with absolute commitment, almost as if the possibility of failure never entered his mind. Some people called it reckless. I never saw it that way. What made Gilles so extraordinary wasn't that he took risks. Every Formula One driver takes risks. It was that he accepted those risks without hesitation or calculation. Once the visor came down, there was only one objective in his mind: find the absolute maximum the car could deliver, and if that wasn't enough, somehow ask for a little more. Ferrari found something incredibly special in him. Even when the car wasn't the quickest on the grid, Gilles had an ability to make every race unforgettable. He could defend positions that looked impossible to defend. He could attack from places where nobody expected an overtake. He drove with an imagination that couldn't be taught. That's something very few drivers possess. Technique can be learned. Experience can be gained. Imagination is something you're born with. Whenever people ask me to explain Gilles, I always find myself thinking about the 1979 French Grand Prix at Dijon. Yes, René Arnoux finished behind him that afternoon, but the result almost became secondary. What the world remembers is those final laps with the two of them swapping positions corner after corner, wheels touching, refusing to surrender an inch. Even today, people call it one of the greatest battles Formula One has ever produced. It wasn't carefully calculated. It wasn't overly cautious. It was two extraordinary drivers trusting one another enough to race right at the edge without losing respect. That's what I admired so much. Gilles never raced to protect his reputation. He raced because he genuinely loved racing. There was a purity to the way he competed that reminded all of us why we had fallen in love with motorsport in the first place. Long before sponsorships became enormous and media obligations dominated every weekend, Gilles represented something beautifully simple. Put him in a fast car, give him a green flag, and he was completely alive. His relationship with Ferrari supporters was unlike almost anything I've seen. They didn't love him because he always won. They loved him because every lap felt honest. They knew he would never settle for protecting a comfortable finish if there was even the smallest chance of fighting for something more. Drivers don't usually earn that kind of loyalty through victories alone. They earn it through character. Then came Zolder in 1982, and Formula One lost one of its brightest lights far too early. Whenever the sport loses someone like Gilles, you can't help wondering how much more they still had to give. Championships may have come, they may not have. Somehow, I don't think that would have changed how people remember him. What I admired most about Gilles Villeneuve was that he reminded every driver on the grid that racing is supposed to stir something inside you. It's supposed to make your heart beat faster. It's supposed to inspire people watching from the grandstands to dream about impossible things. Very few drivers have ever done that as naturally as Gilles did. Decades later, whenever his name comes up, I still don't think first about results. I think about the feeling he gave all of us every time those engines came to life. And finally, there is Ayrton Senna. Some people might find it unusual that I chose a driver from a younger generation, someone I never truly raced wheel to wheel in Formula One, but admiration doesn't require sharing the same championship battle. Sometimes it comes simply from recognizing greatness when it unfolds right in front of you. That's exactly what Ayrton represented to me. By the time Ayrton arrived in Formula One, I'd already spent decades in motorsport. I'd seen world champions come and go. I'd watched legends reshape the sport. It takes a great deal to impress someone who's been around racing that long. Ayrton managed to do it almost immediately. What struck me first wasn't his speed. Everyone could see that. It was the intensity he brought to every single lap. Most drivers understand that not every session carries the same importance. They'll conserve the car during practice or settle for a solid qualifying position if the championship picture allows it. Ayrton never seemed wired that way. Every lap mattered, every breaking point mattered, every tenth of a second mattered. It was as though he demanded perfection from himself every time he climbed into the cockpit. That mentality was nowhere more obvious than in qualifying. Even today, when people talk about the greatest qualifying drivers in Formula One history, Ayrton's name is almost always the first one mentioned. Watching him attack a single flying lap at Monaco felt different from watching anyone else. He wasn't simply finding speed. He seemed to discover parts of the circuit that nobody else realized existed. The margin between him and the rest of the field often left experienced drivers shaking their heads in disbelief. Then there was the rain. I've always believed that wet weather reveals the complete racing driver. Dry conditions reward preparation and machinery. Rain exposes instinct, feel, and confidence. Ayrton possessed all three at a level I've rarely witnessed. His drive at Donington Park in 1993 remains one of the finest performances I've ever seen. Starting fifth, he climbed to the lead before the opening lap was complete, passing some of the strongest drivers and fastest cars of that era in conditions that bordered on impossible. You can study that opening lap 100 times and it still feels extraordinary. But what I admired most wasn't a particular victory or another pole position. It was the standard he set for everyone around him. Ayrton forced an entire generation to improve because accepting second best was never an option in his world. His teammates felt it. His rivals felt it. Even the engineers working beside him knew they had to raise their own standards because he expected excellence from everyone involved. He also carried a deep sense of purpose beyond the racetrack. Many people remember the fierce competitor, the emotional champion, and the unforgettable rivalries with Alain Prost. I remember someone who genuinely cared about leaving a positive impact on others, especially the children of Brazil. That side of Ayrton became even more apparent after his passing as the work of the Instituto Ayrton Senna continued changing countless young lives. To me, that's every bit as important as anything he accomplished inside a Formula One car. Like everyone in motorsport, I remember exactly where I was when we lost him at Imola in 1994. It didn't just end the career of a three-time world champion. It changed Formula One forever. The conversations about safety became more urgent. The atmosphere inside the paddock changed. Every driver understood that the sport had reached another turning point. When I think about Ayrton Senna today, I don't think only about speed, championships, or unforgettable laps. I think about commitment, complete, uncompromising commitment to becoming the very best version of yourself. Very few athletes in any sport have ever pursued excellence with that level of intensity. That's why I admired him so deeply. Some drivers become champions. A select few become symbols of what human potential can look like when talent, discipline, faith, and determination all come together. Ayrton Senna was one of those rare people. Looking back now, I don't remember these five men simply as champions. I remember them as teachers. Jim Clark taught me that greatness could look effortless. Jackie Stewart showed me that changing the sport could matter just as much as winning it. Niki Lauda proved that intelligence and resilience belong together. Gilles Villeneuve reminded us that passion can become a legacy of its own. And Ayrton Senna showed what happens when talent meets absolute commitment. People will always debate who was the greatest Formula One driver. I don't think that question will ever have a final answer. But if you ask me who earned my admiration, these are the five names I'll always come back to. That's the thing about racing. The trophies eventually collect dust. The records are broken. But the people who change the way you see the sport stay with you forever. And even now, after all these years, I still find myself learning from them every time I look back.